Hey guys, welcome to Midwest Sagacity. Thanks for stopping by. I'm Midwest Savage, and today we're going to go ahead and get into the banking situation and the developments that have happened over the past week. And you remember they said they weren't going to do any bailouts this time, right? But those guys are tricky. Let's see if we can decipher what they just did. Let's get into it. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and jump into the first video. This first one's a real quick one, just summarizing what happened. Let's get into it.
The FDIC says it has accepted a bid from jpmorganchase. Over the weekend, U.S. regulators asked big banks to submit their final bids to take over the ailing bank of First Republic.
I said this in my last video. Man, I can't even get 10 seconds in these videos before I have to stop them. Now, I didn't watch this video before, so I'm just kind of reacting to it. But seriously, 10 seconds in, of course, JP Morgan, yet again, is taking over another bank, which they're not allowed to do except under extreme circumstances when they decide to bend the law when they feel like it. And wait till you hear how they did this. This is crazy.
Public, among them JP Morgan Chase and PNC. According to people close to the situation, Bank of America did not submit a bid, although they were involved in earlier talks. First Republic saw its shares plunge 90% after deposits tumbled by more than $100 billion during the first quarter.
$100 billion. Now, they don't mention this in this report. This is the second biggest bank failure in history. And of course, JP Morgan sliding in there to pick up another huge bank. And it makes you wonder kind of what is going on here. And on top of that, we got the Federal Reserve, who takes over the bank, takes it away from the owners, and then sells it to JP Morgan immediately. This is how they skirted around JP Morgan acquiring this bank. But there's more to this.
This is the third bank failure this year, following Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank.
All right, so let's take a look at another video, see if we can't make more sense of what actually happened here. And is this going to continue? Let's go ahead and take a look.
Sweet baby Jesus in heaven. Are the banks about to break? The nation's second largest bank failure ever happening just yesterday. First Republic Bank shutting down with over $230 billion in assets as of last month. The FDIC took it over and sold it to a teeny tiny bank known as JP Morgan Chase. This all stemming from Silicon Valley Bank's collapse in March, as you remember. And now Massachusetts Democrat Senator Liz Warren warning of a crisis. She's blaming the Fed. Watch.
Do you think the banking crisis is over?
I don't see how anyone can say that. Because remember, the Fed report that just came out on Friday criticized the Fed sharply for its regulatory and supervisory failures.
You know, good for her for actually admitting that. I don't think that the president or anybody else on that side would admit to any type of failures that goes on in this administration, even though it's been the most horrendous thing that I've seen in my lifetime. There hasn't been a worse president that I've seen. Now, that doesn't date back very long, 1980s, as far as I go back. So, man, but there's quite a few presidents in there, and it hasn't been this bad. I have not seen it this bad. And good for her for actually pointing it out and not going with the line that everything's okay and we've been making great strides for the economy and this and that. I'm glad that she pointed that out. So I don't know what angle they're gonna go with what she's saying, but I think she said something pretty important. I don't think we could say that. If you guys checked out one of my first videos on this whole banking crisis, and when we were going over the guy that worked at BlackRock, he said that this would happen. He said that basically all these major banks are going to have to collapse down into 6 mega banks. So, and if they didn't do it within the next 24 months, that it was going to cascade out of control. So it has to happen pretty rapidly. Here's the third major bank failure, but the second largest bank failure in history. So that's just astounding. Let's go ahead and continue.
Remember, too big to fail? Well, 3 of the 4 largest U.S. bank failures happened over the last 2 months. So what in the wide world of sports is going on? Here with me in the studio to discuss, Fox Business senior correspondent Charlie Gasparino. So, Charlie, break it down for people who are a little worried about this. Are there other banks who suffer from the same weak capitalization problems that First Republic did?
So you have to look at it this way. The Fed did create this crisis, but it didn't create.
See, and I said that as well. Yeah, the Fed created this crisis by loaning out all this cheap money for all this time. You dumped a whole crap ton of money into the stock markets, into the banks, gave everyone loans, and then you put yourself in a situation where if you raised the rates, it was going to collapse the economy. Well, they kept on not raising the rates over the last 14 years, and then we get to a point where we're coming out of a pandemic, and that's when they chose to do it. You guys, fuck, man, you guys can't tell me this ain't on purpose. Had to be planned, especially now that they had their FedNow service coming out and a CBDC coming out. For those of you who don't know, that's a central bank digital currency, basically getting rid of your cash. And I've already talked to people at work about this type of stuff, and they're starting to notice it. Before, if you went somewhere and you didn't know that they didn't accept cash, you'd go in there, we don't accept cash. You're like, well, that's inconvenient. You pull out a card or whatever and hand it to them. But now that you know it's a planned thing, people are starting to get pissed about it. What do you mean you won't take my cash? Yeah. It's time to start waking up and notice these things. Like, they're not just inconveniences. It's a planned obsolescence of your cash to go to a currency that they can track. And they set it up perfectly. You come out of a pandemic, you raise the rates, you collapse the economy, you make the dollar basically be worth nothing. Then you put out your new currency. On top of that, we have several countries trying to leave the dollar as the world reserve currency. It's getting interesting very fast.
It the way Elizabeth Warren is saying. The Fed did was print money like crazy. Okay, the federal government spent money like crazy. You created something known as inflation. And what you do is when you put that much liquidity in the financial system, including on a bank's balance sheet, it's going to go out and do stupid things like invest in all these commercial real estate loans in these see-through buildings that you see in Manhattan and in other places. I was in Chicago. I mean, I can't believe how many see-through buildings I saw in downtown Chicago. So,
which I find it odd that, they're doing these fascias on these buildings and you can see through them and everything, all these glass, and you have rioters just going ham on these buildings. And those front facial windows are not cheap. Sometimes those windows will actually put a business out and into bankruptcy to try to replace one of those windows if it's a small business. Now, First Republican Bank might not have had a problem with that, but maybe they would have, because now that they collapse and everything, they can't afford nothing, and they're, they got sold off.
They went out on the risk spectrum, and now those loans are depressed. On top of that, while this was going on, they had to buy assets. You have to keep capital. Those assets were bought at the top of the market. They were treasury bonds at the top of the market. Now, obviously,
Now, what are they worth?
They're worth less. So when you put that together, both sides of your asset base is depressed. Now, if you throw in on the top of that banking is essentially a confidence game. If you don't have confidence in your institution, if you think First Republic has way too much crappy loans out there, if you think SVB, Silicon Valley Bank has, way too much, revolving loans to start up tech companies that are going to go bust, then you pull your money out. Not only that, you pull your money out because you can get better interest rates in money market funds. Put all that together, and you could have many, many, many more of this sort of situation. I hear the whisper number is there's 24 banks.
What
like
are some of the big ones that you're concerned about?
Well, they're not the big ones. They're these banks with a capitalization of about $200 billion, which is essentially where
They're not the big ones. $200 billion, not the big ones. It makes you wonder what those big banks really have. Yeah, I think there's more than 24 banks here that they're worried about. Those might be two dozen major banks, but there's a lot of smaller banks that are going to start, dwindling down as well. My question is, what happens if people start pulling money out of like jpmorganchase? Then what? It'd be interesting to get into that.
Of First Republic. I think they were about 250 and below. I mean, you look at the number, all the stocks that trade off. Now, there's a lot of short sellers out there trying to capitalize on this, saying that they're all in deep trouble. I can't tell you. I don't look at I don't have their balance sheets. But remember, this is a confidence game. If you can spread a lack of confidence, if you get scared, and you get scared, and you get scared, you pull all your money out of PacWest, which is located in Los Angeles. It's one of the banks that took it on the chin today. Then guess what? Then they're in trouble because their loan book is depressed, their asset base is depressed. To sell, you have to sell those assets not at what you bought it for, but at the depressed price. You see what I'm saying?
So you're taking a loss, but also people who have, and the problem with First Republic, if I'm not mistaken, is the majority of the depositors had deposits accounts worth more than the FDIC would insure.
That's another sort of whole issue here where they keep insuring.
But if they psychologically think that their money's going to be gone,
right? Well, then
they'll do whatever they can. But, they pull that out, and that just hastens the whole
But you know what they're doing?
slide.
They're making it worse because what they're doing is they're saying, okay, we'll basically cover every deposit. So then you'll keep your money in the bank. That's my question. Should the government be covering those deposits over? No, because it creates what's known as moral hazard, and you take even greater risk. And I mean, that's part of the game here. Why are banks in trouble right now? They took enormous risk when the Fed was basically screwing with the dynamics of the markets. It was essentially printing money. It was giving them liquidity.
Yeah, it was giving them extra liquidity, and they were dumping it right back into the stock market, taking risk and gambling. And that was made illegal after, I want to say back in the 1950s, 60s, maybe even earlier than that, maybe during the Depression. But they made it illegal that you could have big banks that dealt with hedge funds and money management, and then you could have personal banks. So if you had your money in the bank, your bank couldn't go and dump money into the stock markets for this reason. Well, they got rid of that, and with all this cheap money, that's what they kept doing. Well, now all those assets they bought up, they're having to sell off because people are pulling their money out. The economy's bad. People need to pull their money out anyway because they have to spend more on everything. And that's just becoming, a draining and self-fulfilling prophecy. And it will continue to happen as people realize, yeah, I'm only covered for $250,000 in the bank, but I have a few million in there, and so they're going to pull all that money out. If everyone that has millions of dollars pulls out of a bank, well, now their deposits are way low. Not only that, banks, instead of loaning that money back out that were getting deposited into the accounts, they, instead of loaning that back out, they stopped playing with the stock market because of the economic pressures and times that we're in. They stopped playing with that money and they started paying off assets. So basically, you're taking the deposits, you're draining that money. Well, if that person needs to take his money out, it's just gone. The money supply is dried up. And that's making the problem even worse because they were paying off these assets and, you know, trying to get rid of them at a loss. So it's going to get worse.
So you have a real problem here. Here's another thing. We talk about too big to fail, that you don't want that. Elizabeth Warren, oh, too big to fail. Biden, too
But
big
she
to fail.
created the system so JPMorgan Chase could go in and under these special circumstances and buy a failing bank.
Think about it. I'm not saying JP Morgan's going under because it's run by a smart guy, Jamie Dimon, and they have, you know, they understand risk management. But they control 13% of all U.S. deposits. That bank is the U.S. bank. They can't go under. If they go under, it's like lights out. And by the way, again, every major bank has an issue. If you have to sell all your assets right now to make deposits, you could be technically insolvent. And it doesn't matter which one you are. That's because it's a confidence game.
So you guys heard it there. Every bank has problems like these. It's the confidence that the people that bank there have with that bank and whether they're going to have problems or not. And right now, people are having problems on their own. They having to pull money out because everything costs so much more. It's way overinflated. They did this at a time. I mean, they set this up perfectly to collapse these banks. Right in time for their FedNow service, right in time for them to release their own digital currency and get rid of cash. If you guys think about it, the situation with the banks is the same situation with our money. The only thing that gives it any value is the confidence that we can use it to pay for things. You try to take a dollar bill to some places. I was talking to a friend at work. He went to the city dump and, you know, they charge you so much for dumping whatever there, and they wouldn't take his money, his cash. There's places not taking cash now, and people are starting to notice it. It's the same thing. There's nothing backing that cash. It costs money to even make the cash. So, you know, you have $1, but it costs $1.25 to make. And then on top of that, it goes through inflation. So that dollar's worth less and less. So the dollar ain't even worth $1 anymore. The only thing that gives it any value is us and people willing to accept it. Once people stop, you know, wanting to accept it, it's worth nothing. That's the same thing with these banks, because the main thing that they have is money. And when people lose confidence in the money, they lose confidence in the banks. The banks have no value if people don't have confidence in it. But, you know, it's just a crazy, crazy time, and it's going to get worse. Definitely going to get worse. I mean, gas is about to go up. I just came across this today. Let's go ahead and take a look at this video real quick.
Well, Iran's Navy seized an oil tanker sailing under the flag of the Marshall Islands headed for the U.S. This footage, aired by Iranian state TV, shows commandos rappelling from a helicopter onto the deck of the Advantage Suite in the Gulf of Oman. The ship had sailed from Kuwait, and its destination was listed as Houston. Iran's state-run news agency said an unknown ship collided with an Iranian vessel last night, causing injuries and missing crew members. It is not clear whether the tanker was involved.
Yeah, so now these countries that don't want to accept the U.S. dollar for oil anymore or pay with their dollars, they want to pay in their own currency or an agreed upon currency other than the U.S. dollar, they've gotten bold enough to start seizing our assets over there. What are we going to do about that? Like I said before, you know, when the banks start going through all stuff like this, and as bad as it's going to get, it's going to be much worse than 2008. Trust me. It has to be. Otherwise, the market won't fix itself and it'll just delay. Maybe like after 2008, how everything just went sky high. If that happens again, that's just making it worse for even later on. That means a total societal collapse, a big, nuke all at once later on down the road. It's still repairable at this point, but it's going to be pretty bad. Enough to the point where you need a war. It seems like it's coming. I don't know if you guys feel it or not. I've felt it for a while. I mean, while they're stoking the fires here in the U.S. about transgender issues, race issues, all kinds of issues like that, while we're just fighting over that stuff, they're doing this stuff behind our backs, overseas, underneath the radar. You probably won't hear much about this, or maybe you will. Maybe they want to ramp up, the confidence of the people, because they have to have the backing of the people for us to go to war. So we're gonna want them to do something about this. But something else happened today as well. Let's take a look.
Meanwhile, the Defense Department is now tracking another balloon that flew over Hawaii and is headed toward Mexico. It's not clear who this balloon belongs to.
Come on, we know who it belongs to.
But Pentagon officials say they do not believe it's another spy balloon. What's your take?
Well, one of the challenges is,
Look, they just don't want to admit that their jobs are replaceable. We don't need them because they ain't doing anything anyway.
when somebody is testing you, you have to pass the test. Well, every time we don't know what to do and we hem and haw like we did the first time, and now again, we're being tested and we're failing the test.
Well, former director of
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't they test our capabilities, our defenses, and our reactions? Iran seizing the oil tank, them dropping balloons, like literal spy balloons. What do you think that's for? They are trying to goad us into a war with them. Their economies are just as bad. That's why they're trying to start all this stuff with the U.S., and they have been for quite a while. Their economies have been worse than ours have. They were especially hit. I mean, China especially was hit hard with the pandemic. They did total lockdowns. No one was going to work. Economy was tanking. On top of that, the huge droughts they had. It's bad for them. They want a war.
National Intelligence John Ratcliffe joined me on Sunday Morning Futures, and he said that China is not just behaving badly on America by these surveillance acts, but they're also interfering in our elections, and he's expecting it to happen in 2024.
I mean, they're more than doing that. Why wouldn't you bring up the police stations that are stationed here? I mean, come on. Seriously. Like, we gotta really start telling the truth out here. I mean, forget possible interference in elections. Police stations on U.S. soil. I told you they would just float over that stuff so fucking fast and just forget about it. It's like already out of their mind. That I would have brought that out up before interfering with elections. Police stations. They only busted 2 people in New York, but that watchdog group that put them onto this had already mentioned Los Angeles, San Francisco, Minnesota, Nebraska, just a few of them. There's 3 in Ontario. No one is going after them. Why?
Watch this.
Absolutely. They played in the 2022 midterms. Christopher Wray said China's an unparalleled threat. Chinese officials have been charged for interfering in American political processes.
So if that's the case, who did they interfere for? Why aren't these questions being asked? Yeah, we have just got to start asking the right questions. I could care less if people want to have abortions or dress like a woman, but that's a whole nother issue. Like I said, I could care less about that crap. What are they doing to society with this social engineering, with us arguing over these dumb things that doesn't affect anybody except for the people that feel that way? Like I said, no one cares. I could care less what someone does on their own time and stuff. I think people get mad about it because you push it in their face, you push it on the children. And when you do that, you start pushing on children, people will push back. And I'm going to get into that with another video about the Bud Light situation, because I don't think people understand why people are mad at Bud Light. We'll just go ahead and wrap this video up here. And maybe I'll get into that Bud Light situation. I really appreciate everybody stopping by. I really appreciate everybody sticking with me. I apologize that I haven't uploaded this week yet until this video. In the process of trying to find a place to live. Anyways, we'll go ahead and end it there. You know, what's it going to take for people to, you know, look around them and see that everything is costing more. Everything is more dangerous. Everything almost appears like it is planned. What's it going to take for people to kind of start seeing the signs? Remember, it's going to take you showing them. It's going to take you sharing videos like this. And most of all it takes is all you got.